Welcome back, my friends, to Guns Up Review. Today, we're going to talk about a hot topic. We're going to talk about, should I leave my mags loaded or should I leave them empty to protect the springs? We're going to use a little engineering, a little science, that stuff, and answer the question. Be right back. All right, so everyone is arguing, and you can hear both sides of the story all over the internet and all over YouTube about, should I pack these full of bullets or should I leave them empty? Well, the answer for packing them full of bullets is pretty simple, because that way I'm ready to go anytime, right? If I put my ammo, my cartridges, this one is full, this is ready to go. If I have to get serious in the quickness, that's a word, I can click this in, locked and loaded, ready to go. Whereas this guy, I'm just hold on a minute. I'm gonna get this ready here in just a second. That's one, okay? You don't want to be doing this, right? You want to be this guy, ready to rock and roll. So, but then people say, well, but if I do that, my spring will be weak, and when I really need it, my ammunition won't feed into my weapon. Well, I am personally, as an engineer, I am not convinced of that, okay? So let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about this little 223 or 556 PMAG. And let's take this apart and let's see what's inside here. So up here where the bullets go in, where your cartridges go in, you have a little plastic follower that rides in a little track there, and as the bullets go in, this follower goes down, and in behind here is a big spring. So let's see if I can take this apart without the spring flying all over the room and injuring myself here. Okay, so a little plate comes off. You've got a little bottom plate, and then whoa, there's the spring. So here's the spring and the follower, okay? So the spring is made out of steel, and it's made out of a special steel called spring steel. You guessed it, okay? And what happens is I compress that, it returns back, and so it deforms. So let's go to our engineering class over here and let's talk about this for a second, what's happening, okay? So springs work on kind of in this principle here in this region. So what you have here is a diagram. I've got my trusty marker, and you've got where I say sigma here, which is normal stress. Okay, so my engineers out here will know exactly what that is. You might call it, for the layman, well, if you can spell, intensity of force. Okay, so this axis here is how intense the force is. So as that number increases, what happens on this axis down here? Now this is epsilon, it's the Greek letter epsilon, and this is for strain. That's too little for us to see. Strain. It's too far away for me to write. And you might think of strain as just this. Deformation. ION. Okay? So this is, as the intensity of the force goes up, the deformation of the steel increases. And the units over here are in like inches per inch. So for every inch of a material that I have, it's going to stretch so many inches. This axis over here is in English system in PSI, pounds per square inch. Okay? So as I have this spring, as I increase the load, the deformation is growing. Now in this case, the deformation is getting shorter, so it would be a negative, but it works the same way. So as long as I stay in this region here, okay, that means, in other words, as long as I don't get above that much force, okay, or intensity of force. Then once I squeeze that and I deform that spring, when I let it go, what happens to it? It goes right back where it started from, okay? That's what the elastic region is on any kind of steel or aluminum or plastic for that matter. As long as I stay within that region, this thing is going to return where it started from. Now, we all have that little sister that borrowed your favorite thing, right? Your Slinky. Here's your Slinky, and you love to play with your Slinky, right? But as soon as little sister got it, she stretched it, right? It's just a spring. But what happens if I stretch it too much? Now, look at my Slinky here. In the middle, right? Where'd it go? There's a spot where I stretched it too much. You all had that Slinky, right? And it wouldn't go back where it started from, right? Every time you rolled it up, it had a sprung spring right in the middle. Well, why is that? Because as I stretch that, as I add force to it, what your little sister did is got above this point, and you have what's called yielding. That means you have permanent deformation. That means when I take the load off, it doesn't go back to where it started from, okay? Now, gun manufacturers and magazine manufacturers know this. There's engineers that work there, believe it or not. And these springs are manufactured so that even when fully loaded, right, with this is a 30 round magazine. So if I go ahead and put 30 rounds in here, if you look through the little window here, you can see the spring is really compressed. But even then, this spring is designed to remain in this elastic region. So when I take the load off, in other words, when I start stripping rounds out of here in my gun or my rifle, right, then that spring is going to return to its original state, okay? So that's how springs work. That's how these magazines are designed. If I loaded that up with 30 rounds and I went above this, the next time I fired this, when I got to the 30th round, there would be not really any pressure on that last bullet, and it wouldn't want to push it to the top of the magazine, and I'd probably have a misfeed, okay? Now the other thing that you have to worry about in these springs is this, and we're talking about loading them up, putting them in your gun cabinet, and letting them sit, okay? And that is creep, okay? Now that's not the weird guy that lives next door. No, creep is when you have material, this is Silly Putty, right? If I took Silly Putty and I just hung it here, and I just sit there for a long time. Now I could probably sit here for as long as I have film in my camera, and this would not move, right? But if I put a load on this Silly Putty, if I start making this heavier and I start letting it sit here, right, what starts to happen to it? Now what happens if I elevate the temperature? I heat up the Silly Putty, right? It starts getting longer and longer and longer and longer, right? And that's what's called creep, okay? The material has little slip planes between the molecular structure there, little deformations, impurities in the material, lots of things that allow one molecule to slip past another. And as it sits there under load, it starts getting longer and longer and longer. So as a spring starts to creep, it loses its strength. This string of Silly Putty here, which is now, it's down small enough where it's stretching under its own weight until it touches the table, right? So now it's really creeping hardcore, isn't it? Okay, that's what you don't want from a spring. Now when is creep like that going to happen? Well, it accelerates with a large constant load. And we're talking a large load. We're talking about right up here up against the yield point. That's not where, we're down here somewhere below that on a spring designed from your manufacturer. So we don't have this. It worsens with elevated temperatures. If you load your magazines up and you store them, I don't know, in your shed, in the back of your truck, you know, where it can get 120 degrees in the summer, 140 degrees, then, you know, you might have a little problem with creep. But for most of us, where are we going to store our ammunition? In our gun safe, in our house, in a bottom drawer, somewhere inside where it's air conditioned year round, so it's 72 degrees. you don't really have any elevated temperature. And creep is worse in softer materials. So something like Silly Putty. Spring steel is not a soft material. It's a very hard, as a matter of fact, it's harder than, you know, a mild steel or a hot roll steel like A36 steel. Spring steel is a much harder steel. And so that particular steel is designed to not creep. So, as an engineer, as a doctor, but not the kind that helps people, I say, load them up, boys. It's gonna be all right. In your lifetime, you will never get enough creep to ever know the difference. The main thing is if you store this in a very dusty environment, then this little follower on here might get some grit in it, and that might keep it from sliding, right? So, but if you store it in a clean place, like your gun safe, it's not going to get dusty. You can store it in there for our lifetime. We will never ever notice any difference, any degradation. So, I say, load them up, y'all. Be prepared. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you here next time on Guns Up Review.